Hello, my name is Eric Follick. I'm a Platonist, contemplative, ascetic, and renunciant. I'd like to read for you a little question and answer that I've entitled here Inquiry from a quote minimalist unquote. It consists of a slightly edited question that I received by email from someone uh, who had seen my other videos or some of them and was interested to ask me a question about my personal possessions. And then is followed by my answer. It's pretty brief. Uh, if you like to see the written form of this, it's at my blogspot site at platonistasceticism.blogspot.com. That's platonistasceticism.blogspot.com. And I'll also post it at my academia.edu page at independent.academia.edu/Eric Follick, capital ERIC, no space, capital F as in Frank, ALLICK. I hope this description of my very brief description of my possessions and how I decide to have possessions is or what to have is not too personal or specific or particular just to me, but that was the only way to answer the the question, and I was persuaded that it would perhaps be useful to others to see, and I hope that my description of my possessions and so forth and how I determine how to get them or when to get them will be of more general applicability than my own personal circumstances, and give some idea of the principle involved, at least a little, I hope, and so will excuse my talking specifically about myself. So here we go with the inquiry from a minimalist. Here is the question that I received in its essential form. I have been listening to your lectures on YouTube for a while now and have slowly been incorporating Platonic ascetic practices into my own lifestyle. And while I understand that we should not dedicate much focus to the trappings of this physical existence, open parentheses, e.g., fashion, social status, wealth, close parentheses, nevertheless, we must live in this world to some extent. Over the years, I've often wondered if you had a personal rule or rules regarding physical possessions. As a follower of the extreme minimalism movement, I strive to own as little as reasonably possible. For instance, my ideal possessions include 2 changes of clothes, the minimum amount of toiletries to maintain hygiene, a phone, identifying documents, and a bag to hold them in. The application of extreme minimalism in my life extends further to include things such as property and social obligations. I am aware that some of these concepts apply to your own life per your recorded lectures, but I'm writing to see if you can elaborate more on how possessions play a role in your life. For instance, how do you decide the amount and type of clothing to own? What is your stance on furniture and bedding? Open parentheses, many followers of extreme minimalism forego furniture and simply live on the floor, so to speak. How does technology play a role in your lifestyle? Open parentheses, for example, do you own a phone? Close parentheses. Okay, so that is the question. And then here is my response, my answer. Thank you for listening to my videos and for reaching out. It is nice to hear that you have been gradually taking up some Platonic ascetic practices I have described. As regards material possessions, I want and try to have as few and little and inexpensive as is reasonably possible for survival in this complicated, brave new modern techno world and in a temperate climate and still having to work part-time. I am not yet retired. Of course, I don't have and never have had and never would have a car or a television or a stereo or any expensive or big ticket items or any property or my own condominium or house. And by far, the single most expensive thing I have is my prescription eyeglasses, which are a necessity I can't do without. But beyond that, I don't really have a rule or rules about those few necessary things I need to have. I just decide as I go along on an ad hoc basis. Also, whatever clothing or other things I have, I keep until they are fully worn out and no longer functional. So I have various things that are more than 30, 40, or even 50 years old. So in fact, the one spoon that I use for my one daily meal comes from my ancestral home, and I've had for more than 50 years. I have a worn out laundry bag that I got when I was in college in 1978, and things like that. When I do need to get something, which I really don't like doing at all or have interest in doing, I just try to decide what is reasonably in accord with voluntary ascetic poverty and what effect it might have on my soul and its constitution. It was sort of a reference there to Plato's Politeia and its discussion of such things. As regards clothing, I do wear out a pair of running shoes every several months, and I can't wear them once the heels are too worn out because it makes my knees hurt, since I have to walk all the time, even just to get to the bus, but only purchase new, of course, vegetarian and non-leather ones, obviously, of course, ones that are on sale or less expensive. I only wear Dickies work pants, of which I have a few pairs, keeping at least one that is in fairly good shape to wear to work. I have one pair of vegan Adidas Stan Smith sneakers that I got on sale to wear to work and going to and from the bus when it is raining or there is snow. I have some shirts, some of them are very old and worn, and have to have my separate work shirts, which are imprinted with the Mathnasium where I work logo. I have to have some outerwear for when it is cold, an umbrella for when it rains, some separate thick socks for when it is very cold, etc. I just live in a room I rent in an old rundown rooming house, and that's with just some other ordinary worldlings who rent rooms here. Unfortunately, I can't live in a semi-eremitical Laura or Laura with other Platonist contemplative ascetics. Wouldn't that be a nice thing? But it's not possible in the present time. It is already furnished with a bed, so I do have one, a couple of old rickety chairs, a warped fold-up table on which I have the computer sitting that I'm recording this on, and etc. I also have an old bookcase that I brought with me here for my Greek books and texts and auxiliary English ascetic books, though these I usually give away as soon as I have read them. I am 65 now and can no longer sit cross-legged on the floor or sleep on the floor, though a mattress on the floor would be okay when I might have to move sometime, like I used to when I was younger. In fact, as an ascetic trying to survive alone and unsupported and incognito in this brave new modern world, there have been times when I had rented a whole apartment and the only thing I had in it was like an old fold up chair and a piece of foam pad to put under the on the floor to sleep on. But and it was like an echo chamber, and everybody commented on it. But I can't really do that at the present time, and so I do as I described. As far as technology goes, I have a small, inexpensive Chromebook on which I am writing this to you. I do have a cell phone, but only a flip phone, not a smartphone, so called. Really dumb phone, dumbifying phones. Just a phone to talk, not as a computer with so called apps and so forth, for the service for which I pay only $20 a month. Here, if you can see, is a picture of my little, old fashioned flip phone that I have. Anyway, this has already gotten pretty long. I hope I have answered your question somewhat at least. In sum, though I long for the old days and places where and when a renunciant could manage with just the clothes on his back and a few utensils, and dislike having material possessions and anything that binds to or is involved in or directs attention to this world, and want to have as few as possible, it is no longer possible to do this entirely, or at least the way we used to do it in the old days, in traditional societies where things were simpler, where there was a niche or a place for renunciants, however tenuous, where you could wander to different shelters or get alms for food or things like that. It would be wonderful to have nothing in this world, and that is again what I would long for, and would be, really ascetics and renunciants want to have as little as possible in this world. But as little as possible depends on what kind of circumstances you are in the relative world. Want to have as few as possible. It is no longer possible to do this entirely in our present circumstances, and at least where I live in suburban Maryland, in the Washington, D.C. area, where winter can be quite cold, especially lately, there can be heavy rain, etc. So I do the best I can just to survive in minimal fashion, again without a specific rule or rules, except the principle of voluntary monastic poverty, just deciding as best as I can as I go along. Still, all my material possessions altogether, except the bookcase, could fit in the back of a car. Incidentally, I don't use the word minimalism or think of it. I think in terms of renunciation and ascetic and monastic poverty, which is absolutely essential spiritually along traditional lines. And that ends my reply. I would again emphasize maybe that last sentence, that they're not really talking about modern minimalism or a minimalism movement, which from what tiny bit I know of it, seems to be like a modern secular idea, and doesn't imply necessarily all the what's involved in being an ascetic and renunciant and traditional monastic poverty. From what little I've seen, it doesn't even imply celibacy or any of those things that are so essential or the core of a ascetic renunciant life, and doesn't involve a spiritual worldview or conceptual framework in which it's practiced. So I do think am thinking in terms of voluntary monastic poverty and renunciation and asceticism, and having as little to do with the material world as possible, to devote oneself to contemplative ascetic practice and getting free from the cycle of birth and death. So I think in those and act in those along those traditional lines as best as I can, rather than, again, according to any sort of modern ideas of or secular ideas of minimalism. I'd also, a couple of things additional I might point out is that the idea of a rule or rules, as I've written about in other contexts, presents a lot of problems, or can. It's best, I think, if one can or has the spirit to do so, as I mentioned, to think in terms of the principles that are involved and try to apply them as best as possible under the circumstances, and honestly, being aware of your own motivations and trying to do that. Otherwise, just having a rule can get to be a legalistic thing and a neurotic and obsessive compulsive thing, and can actually make it that a way of tricking out of real poverty, that if you've met the rule, then you could have something even if you don't really need it or something like that. So in any case, for better or worse, I don't have a specific rule of those things. And like I say, I try as best as I can on the basis of the principle to apply that, to make decisions on that basis. Also, I point out that it's not a rule. Sort of tends to think like you'd like to have more things, but you can't because there's the rule, or you would want certain things or want to do certain things, but are stopped by the rule. For actual contemplative, ascetic, and renunciant, as I hope I've indicated, we want to have as few things as possible. We like to have nothing. We'd like to have not even have this body and be in this world at all altogether. And in terms of possessions, we'd like to have as little as possible. And as I said, I wish I could. I'd like to I long for those old days when we could just have one robe and one bowl, as they say, or just live in a makeshift hermitage or hut, and but those are no longer the circumstances that we're in, and there could be some advantages to our present circumstances in what in some respects we can have little or stuff, like we don't have to spend as much time and energy getting food as our forebears did, and so I guess that's sort of an advantage. But also, this modern world is very complicated, and it's hard to not be involved with society to a greater degree. I mean, you have to pay taxes, you have to make money to earn money even to get the minimal amount of things you need. You have to be, for an old guy like me, you need to be involved with Social Security and Medicare and so forth. All really a pain, but we try to do the best we can and have as little to do with the world and the senses as we can, and do what strive for freedom and liberation, and to be exclusively devoted to spiritual practice as much as we can. So anyway, there's a little bit of ad hoc addition to my reply. And anyway, again, I hope that this is at least a little helpful to someone out there, and that I'm not speaking of myself too much in mentioning some personal details. But again, I hope it's the principle that I hope I'm sort of disclosing by that discussion and question and answer and reply that is worth posting and making known. And since I did receive the question, and a couple people liked my reply and thought it was worth sharing, I decided to do so. So anyway, anyone out there, renounce as much possessions as you can, renounce the world as much as you can, and devote yourself to attaining liberation. Okay, thank you. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.